Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're taking a deep dive today into The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. Some really interesting excerpts you sent in. It really makes you think about how technology shapes how we think and going way deeper than the obvious.
Yeah, it's a question that just keeps getting more and more relevant. I mean, especially now, right?
Yeah.
It seems like technology just changes faster every day.
Right, and it's like we all know our phones are basically glued to us, but Carr really makes you think about he uses this phrase intellectual technologies, which I have to admit made me stop and think.
Yeah, it's a good distinction to make.
Because it's not just a hammer or a plow, it's something that's actually rewiring our brains.
Right, exactly.
Imagine your life without, say, a map.
Hmm.
How different would your perception of space and direction even be?
It's remarkable, isn't it? You think about early humans experiencing time as this natural flow, dictated by sunrise and sunset, and then boom, the mechanical clock. And suddenly we're dividing time into these really precise, controllable units.
It's like we were just handed a whole new dimension, like in the time machine. But it's not just clocks and calendars, right? Carr also talks about maps and how as they became more and more sophisticated, they might have actually altered the very structure of our brains.
Yeah, and he highlights this fascinating study about London cab drivers. Researchers found that these cabbies, I mean, they have to memorize this insane network of streets, right? They actually had a larger hippocampus than the average person.
Hold on, the hippocampus, that's the part of the brain that's responsible for spatial memory, right?
Exactly. It's like their brains physically adapted to hold all that spatial information.
Okay, so if their brains can grow to accommodate that, does that mean the opposite could happen? Could our reliance on GPS actually be shrinking that part of our brains?
That's the question Carr raises, and it really makes you think. It speaks to the incredible plasticity of the brain, though. Its ability to rewire itself based on our experiences.
See, that's mind-blowing to me. So it's not like this is a new thing, this whole rewiring idea. Our brains have always been adapting to new tools and new experiences.
Absolutely, yeah. Every new skill you learn, every language you pick up, every experience you have, it all leaves a physical imprint on your brain. It's constantly changing, constantly molding itself in response to your environment.
So if our brains are always adapting, what happens when the tool we're using most is the internet? That's where Carr's book takes kind of a turn.
Yeah, he argues that the internet, while it's a powerful tool, no question, might actually be rewiring us in ways that make it harder to think deeply, like really focused thinking.
Okay, so how does he get there? What's the connection between our constantly buzzing digital world and this idea of our brains actually changing?
Well, Carr draws this fascinating parallel between the internet and earlier intellectual technologies, like the printed word.
Okay.
He argues that the book itself, just as the technology, fostered a very particular kind of thinking, deep, linear, immersive.
Wait, so you're saying the actual physical act of reading a book with its pages and chapters that actually impacted how our brains processed information?
Exactly.
Wow.
Think about, imagine trying to write a whole novel on a scroll.
Right.
It'd be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
The book, with its format, it allowed for complex ideas to be laid out in this really structured way. It invites deeper engagement, reflection.
That makes sense. But before the book, even before the printing press, people still wrote. Right. So how did that shape thinking?
Right. So early forms of writing, like scrolls or wax tablets, they were great for recording information, but not so great for conveying a complex argument or a narrative.
Yeah.
It's hard to sustain this long, intricate train of thought when you're dealing with a medium that's literally unwieldy. The format just imposed these limitations.
It's like trying to have a deep conversation in 140 characters or less or something.
Exactly. And then, boom, Gutenberg comes along with this printing press.
Yeah.
Right? And suddenly books are cheaper, they're more available. Knowledge, which was once reserved for the elite few, it starts to spread like wildfire. Carr argues that this led to the literary mind becoming the general mind.
So instead of just a handful of scholars debating all these complex ideas, now everybody has access. It's like the printing press. It democratized knowledge.
Exactly.
Think about how different our world would be if access to information was still limited to a select few.
Right. Precisely. And with that widespread literacy, you see this new way of thinking emerging. People were engaging with complex arguments, forming their own opinions based on what they read. It was the foundation for critical thinking, for debate, and ultimately for, the scientific revolution,
Yeah.
the Enlightenment.
Wow. It's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as the printing press could have had this monumental, like, ripple effect on history. But of course, now we're living in the age of the internet. We're swimming in information. We're constantly bombarded with notifications and updates and,
Yeah.
everything. So are we experiencing a similar kind of cognitive shift, or is it something else entirely? So we've seen how maps changed our brains and the printing press like revolutionized how we think, but now with the internet, we're dealing with information overload on a scale we've never seen before, right?
Right.
So is this pushing our brains in a new direction, or maybe like scattering our thoughts a bit?
That's exactly what Carr's worried about.
Hmm.
He argues that the internet, with its constant distractions, it's kind of all over the place, not linear, it might actually be hurting our ability to really focus and think deeply.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly being pulled in a million directions. Think about your own like online habits. Do you ever find yourself just endlessly scrolling, clicking from one thing to the next without really like absorbing anything?
Sure.
I know I do.
Yeah, it's a really common experience. The internet, I mean, it's designed that way, right?
Yeah.
It encourages us to just skim the surface, jump from link to link, just seeking out that next little dopamine hit of novelty.
Totally.
And that can actually have a real impact on how our brains work, how they function.
Okay, so how does that actually work? How does like our internet use actually change our brains?
So it all comes down to how our brains process information. We have this thing called working memory. It's like our brain's mental scratch pad.
Okay.
It's where we hold information while we're actively thinking about it and processing it.
So like the RAM of our brains?
Exactly. But here's the thing. Our working memory, it has very limited capacity.
Yeah.
It's like trying to juggle too many balls at once, right?
Right.
You can only keep so many in the air before things start falling apart.
And the internet is like throwing a million balls at us all at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every notification, every email, every headline we see, it's all competing for that limited space in our working memory. And when that gets overloaded, we find it difficult to focus, to think deeply, to make those like meaningful connections that are essential for really understanding something.
That makes a lot of sense. And Carr talks about how we're even starting to outsource our memories to our devices. It's like we've become so reliant on Google that we don't even bother to try to remember things anymore.
Right. And throughout history, memory has been like this revered thing. It's what connects us to our past. It shapes our identity.
Yeah.
It allows us to learn and grow. But now we have access to this like vast external memory bank in the form of the internet. And while that's incredibly convenient, it also raises some, important questions.
Like what happens when we lose the ability to remember for ourselves?
Exactly. Are we losing something essential, something that makes us like uniquely human?
It's kind of unsettling when you think about it, honestly. It makes you wonder if we're like losing control over our own minds?
It's a valid concern. But it's not all doom and gloom. While the internet, yeah, it presents certain challenges, it's not like we're powerless to, resist them.
Right.
Just like those London cavies developed larger hippocampi, we can train our brains to be more focused, more resilient, even in the face of all this digital distraction.
So there's hope for us yet. But how do we actually do that? How do we like strengthen those mental muscles in a world that honestly seems designed to distract us?
Well, one key is, mindfulness. By becoming more aware of our thought patterns, our habits, we can start to recognize when we're getting sucked into that, vortex of distraction.
So just being more present in the moment, catching ourselves when our minds start to wander.
Exactly. And there are other things we can do too, like practical steps. Setting aside dedicated time for focused work, silencing our notifications. We can even use technology to our advantage.
Like those apps that block distracting websites and stuff.
Exactly. There are tools out there that can help us create healthier digital habits.
This has been an incredible deep dive. It's given me a lot to think about, and I have to say it's made me a bit more aware of like my own relationship with technology. How about you?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the shallows. The big takeaway here is that we're not just passive consumers of technology. We have the power to shape how we use it, and in turn, how it shapes us. And by being mindful, by being intentional, by being proactive, we can really harness the power of technology without letting it, hijack our minds. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and, go forth and think deeply.